Hello, everybody. I'm Katie Jackson, and as Cyril said, I work on corporate social responsibility. That encompasses all of our philanthropic programs, as well as, thank you, as well as our sustainability program as well. So I get to work on those areas of the business. And I'm a second-generation family member. My family, the Jackson family, owns Jackson Family Wines. As I mentioned, we're a family-owned business. We're also family-operated. This is my mother in the blue jacket. She's our chairman of the board, and she manages and runs our business and makes all our long-term strategic decisions. And she's been very supportive of all of our work on the environment, so I really appreciate that about her. And obviously, being a family business, we look towards the future, and we're always thinking about what's going to be good for the business for the long term and for future generations. And we've heard some wonderful presentations today. Roger Bolton talking about the data behind climate change, and several other speakers. And as a mother of 3 children and someone who's looking towards the future of our planet, this is something that is very critically important to us, and my whole family feels very passionate about how urgent the need is to act on climate. So thank you very much for organizing this conference. We're very pleased to be here today and to talk about what we're doing. I'm going to start with just a little introduction about who we are as a company, and I can't do that without starting with my father, Jess Jackson. He founded the business in 1982, and he always used to talk about how wonderful it was that being a family-owned business, we could run our business according to our values. So these are some of the values that he really cared about up here on the screen. And the 2 that really stand out to me as the most important were his desire for uncompromising quality in our wine products, and also the long-term stewardship of the land. My father cared a lot about the land, and he would talk all the time about how important it was that we were taking care of our vineyards for future generations. So that was really the beginning, who we were from the beginning of our business, and also the beginning of how we created our sustainability program at Jackson Family Wines. Just a little more detail about who we are. We were founded in California in the early 1980s, but since then we've evolved to become a global wine company, and we have wineries and vineyards in 5 continents. As you can see up on the screen, these are some of the locations where we're farming and also making wine today. And these are our brands. Kendall Jackson is our most well-known, both in our home country, but also internationally. But we also have a winery in Italy, Tenuta di Arceno, Chateau Le Sage in France, and then numerous other wines and brands in the U.S. and elsewhere. So I'll start talking about our environmental initiatives with this quote from my dad. He used to say all the time, "Take care of the land and it will take care of you." And this was something that he was very passionate about. I mentioned that from the beginning, we were looking at long-term farming practices that would be beneficial for our vineyards and the surrounding lands for future generations. That's where we started with our program, and from there, we started looking at water security. Obviously, being in California, we deal with droughts frequently, and my parents recognized the importance of becoming water secure. And so starting in the early 1990s, we began investing in implementing reservoirs in all of our vineyards to capture storm water during big rain events, so that we could reduce our impact on groundwater and also on surface streams in the area that have vulnerable fish populations. But in 2008, we realized that we really needed to be doing a lot more when it came to looking at our comprehensive environmental footprint. And so that's when we first created a formal sustainability program for our company. And the first thing that we did was we baselined our water use, our energy use, our greenhouse gas emissions, and also the waste that we produce. And this was a critical first step because without understanding our footprint in all of these areas, there was no way we could set reasonable targets for reduction and continue to get better. So we set those goals in 2008, and from then on, we began benchmarking how much progress we were able to make in terms of reducing the water we used and the energy we used year after year. But in 2015, we took the additional step of publishing a public-facing sustainability report. And this had 11 goals in areas that we thought were important for our company to address, not only environmental, but also social, because at Jackson Family Wines, we look at sustainability as dealing with environmental footprint, but also social equity is important. But the 5 goals that were most important for environment are up on the board here. And you can see this is the category of our goal. This is our goal to achieve improvements by 2020. And this was the progress we had to date in 2018. The 2 that are most important for climate are greenhouse gas emissions intensity and the electricity offset from on-site renewables. And as you can see, we set a goal of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions intensity from 2015 by 25% by 2020. As of this past year, we've already achieved a 33% reduction. We've been pleasantly surprised by how much we've been able to do, but we know that this is just the beginning, and we need to do a lot more to really address our scopes 1 through 3 emissions. So we're going to be, I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the projects we're working on to do that today. And then our second goal was to get to a 50% offset of the energy used by our wineries from on-site renewables by 2020. I'll explain how we got there in a moment, but we are currently only at 32%. We still need to do a lot of work, but we are currently working on putting more solar on our roofs, and we are confident that we can get there by next year. This is just a slide that shows some third-party recognition we've gotten for what we've been doing so far. It's always encouraging to hear other people believe in what you're doing and that it's meaningful, and so that's why we wanted to share that. But I'll start by talking about how we've reduced our greenhouse gas emissions footprint. So the main 4 initiatives that we tackled when we looked to how to do that are up on the screen. I'm going to talk about energy efficiency and renewables on the next couple of slides, but the one I wanted to call out was bottle lightweighting. This is an area that, of course, I think a lot of people in the wine industry feel cautious about, because there's a concern that the consumer is going to believe that a heavier bottle has a better quality wine inside of it, and this was something that we also were sensitive to. And so in order to get the rest of our company comfortable with this, we started by taking only 1 ounce of weight off of our wines made by Kendall Jackson, which is our largest volume wine. So we lightweighted the Kendall Jackson Vintners Reserve Chardonnay, and it's over 2 million cases. So we only took a little bit off, but it made a big impact immediately. We were able to show by talking with our sales team that nobody noticed the difference. There was no concern with anybody about the lighter bottle, and there was also no problem with glass breakage. So now we're looking at how we can revamp the bottle to do more significant savings. But what we were able to achieve with just that 1 ounce was we were able to cut our greenhouse gas emissions for our overall footprint by 4%, which was pretty significant. And we also saved $1 million, which is just one of the areas where our company has found that to speak to something an earlier panel talked about, sustainability doesn't always mean higher costs and higher prices of your product. Sometimes the changes you make actually can be beneficial to your bottom line, and this was one area that was true. As I mentioned, we still have a lot more to do, so although we still are working on our 2020 goals, we are looking longer term towards where we would like to be in 2030. So these are the 4 areas that we are targeting for creating goals in the next year to achieve by 2030. The first is around carbon neutrality. The fourth is continuing to conserve and reuse water. And related to that, we're working on a trial to see how we can put more water on our vineyards during the dormant period to try to infiltrate down into the groundwater aquifer. So we're working with some professors at UC Davis on this to see if it's actually possible to put more water into the groundwater aquifer than you take out for irrigation. We're hopeful that this might be possible. And then the third area I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, but we're looking at how we can sequester carbon on our working lands, our farmed lands, and also on our unfarmed lands, because we have about 40% of the lands that we own planted a vineyard right now, and the additional 60%, the majority of are in their natural state. And so we're exploring how we can plant more trees or do other things to increase the carbon sequestration values of those lands. And then the last piece is building more social equity within our communities, because that's also important. I've talked a little bit about our high-level reductions, but I want to talk about how we got there. So we started off, as I mentioned, with a carbon emissions assessment for scopes 1 through 3 in 2008. Scopes 1 and 2 are direct, and then scope 3 is for our supply chain. To do this, we worked with a third-party consultant to conduct an analysis using a standard accounting protocol, and then we got it third-party verified for additional scrutiny. And then the next step was, once we had that, we were able to identify the hot spots, so the areas that we were using too much energy that would be easy to address immediately. And so what we started investing in first was energy efficiencies. We knew we wanted to put solar on our roofs at some point, but we thought that the more efficient we could get under the roof first, the less solar would need to be deployed, and it would just be a better decision environmentally and economically. So what we did was we looked at all of our equipment, our lighting, our variable frequency drives, our boilers, our refrigeration systems, and then we started trading those out for more efficient systems. And we discovered from 2008 to 2013 that we were actually able to save about $8 million in energy costs, which was another encouraging thing, because this was another area where sustainability really was contributing to a beneficial bottom line for us. We also started talking to Tesla in 2012. They approached us about using their battery technology, which you can see on the screen. And these batteries take energy and store it for use when the grid is under a lot of demand. So what we did was we put about 4.2 megawatts of these batteries at 6 of our wineries. And then we've been exploring, along with Tesla, how we can take energy from the grid at night when there's less demand on the grid, and then use that energy that's in these batteries during the day for our winery operations. And so far, it's been really successful. And the hope is that partnered with our solar, we're going to be able to potentially get almost off the grid completely, although that is still a ways off. And then after investing in all of our energy efficiency initiatives, we decided to start putting solar on our roofs. So since 2014, when we first started getting bids and doing construction to put solar on, we've deployed about 7.1 megawatts of solar. That makes us the U.S. wine industry's largest solar portfolio. I mentioned that that's giving us about 32% of the energy we need in our wineries, and we want to get to 50%. So we're looking now at partnering and putting an additional 5 megawatts of solar to achieve that goal. But what it translates to, as it is now, is about 1,400 homes in California that we're producing from our solar panels. And I wanted to touch a little bit on the lessons learned. One of the things that we found when it came to solar was that we thought we would be saving money and doing it better if we tried to do this ourselves, and we quickly found that that wasn't a good idea. So the main lesson I would share is please don't try to do it alone. Find an expert, a third party who knows a lot about this subject already and doesn't have any skin in the game about what kind of system you're using and what kind of solar panels, and then let them help you define exactly what kind of systems are best for your facilities. And then that they can help you go out and get apples-to-apples bids so that you're asking vendors for the same thing, and then you're better able to see exactly what value they're bringing you with their bids. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of things looking toward the future that we're looking into to really continue to address our emissions. You heard Dr. Bolden speak earlier today about the potential of sequestering carbon emissions. This is something that is a very highly concentrated source of CO2, and so we've been collaborating with Dr. Bolden and UC Davis over the past year and a half to do a trial at their university to see whether they can create the technology needed to do this on a large scale. And though it's still very early on in the research, we're looking forward to find out what comes out of that experiment. And then lastly, we're looking at carbon farming. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the potential to sequester carbon on our working lands is exciting to us, as well as on our natural lands. And how this came about was there's a nonprofit in Marin that has been exploring over the past I'm not sure how many years, but they've been working more than 5 years on applying compost to rangelands, so land that's grazed by cattle. And then they're measuring the amount of carbon in the soil at the beginning of their trial, and then they leave it undisturbed, and every year they measure how much carbon has been sequestered, and they're finding that their soils are getting significantly more carbon rich every year. So we were inspired by this, and we wanted to see whether we could do an experiment on working vineyards. And we are looking at various different techniques, but the main ones are reducing our tillage or doing no tillage at all. And seeing how much carbon is sequestered that way, spreading compost, and we're doing different amounts of compost in our various different test blocks to see what amount gets the biggest impact, and if there's a point at which it doesn't really matter that much anymore. And then we're looking at different cover crops we can plant so that we can sequester more carbon in the vineyard that way. And we did an analysis with an outside company of all of our properties last year, and what they told us was that with the right practices, we might be able to inset more carbon on our lands than we emit annually. And obviously, this would be just one more thing that we would like to try to be doing. We also need to target our emissions, but we're hopeful that maybe there's a way that is measurable that actually leads to greater carbon sequestration and vineyard farming practices. And so we're going to conduct this experiment over the next 5 years to see what happens, and we'll be sharing that information with people who are interested. So hopeful that that will lead to something beneficial. And then just wanted to end with this slide that has the co-benefits of carbon farming. Potentially, you might be able to save on fuel and labor costs. You reduce your erosion with cover crops. You reduce the fertilizer you're putting on, and you could also increase your soil water holding capacity of your vineyards, which is something that we're very excited about because in California, the amount of water we use in our vineyards to irrigate is something that we want to decrease. And so if we don't have to irrigate as much because our soils are holding more water, that would be a wonderful thing. And actually, this is our the last thing I wanted to talk about. We feel very honored that Familia Torres reached out to us earlier this year to actually we began talking with them about a year ago to potentially collaborate on forming a working group that would address carbon emissions in the wine industry. The working group title is International Wineries for Climate Change. And the goal is to help wineries measure their carbon footprints and then set aggressive reduction targets to help stabilize the planet. And it's our hope that this group will create a forum for collaboration and build on the momentum that has been generated here in Porto to help galvanize future climate action in the wine industry. Long-term objective is to reduce emissions 80% by 2045. So if you're interested in collaborating with us, we'd love to hear from you. And again, thank you so much for having us, and we look forward to working with all of you on creating a low-carbon future for our industry.
Thank you so much, Katie.